Hello, everyone. So we're going to be doing a mock case interview, and specifically, Diego here wants to do something a little bit more related to cloud or AI. And I was thinking about like, okay, let's do something a little bit similar to what would be interesting for that particular field, in which case it'd be more of like an implementation style, more technical, which is the kind of role he wants. So I'm going to be sending over this case interview or this case study in the chat here. You can just tell me when you're done reading it through. There is a part where it says stop here, so just don't continue reading from that point. All right, so what did you think of the case? Can you tell me about like what you gathered from it?
Yeah, so from what I've gathered, I know that your company's named Big Bucks, and the biggest pain that you guys have right now is your help desk service. There's also the increased pressure from competition as well
Mm-hmm.
coming in. I know that calls are delayed typically by 40 minutes. There's no way to keep kind of tracking on the customer or notes on the call. I know you guys are want to include a customer relations manager, a CRM,
Mm-hmm.
to help manage current and future customers and also track and prioritize those customers as well. Your right now, I know your IT department is kind of underprepared and inexperienced, but you have a 1 month window to get a CRM up and running and to make a build and buy decision. I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering, what is a what do you mean by a build and buy decision?
Yeah, so whenever it comes to a new system, you can either customize it from scratch, like, okay, we're going to be very nitpicky about every single thing out there, and we would build it typically. Or you buy software out of the box, and that's what you do, you configure it. So a lot of companies, they either go customize and they do it in-house, or they hire people to do that. It's a lot more money, it's a lot more energy, and takes a long time too. But if you do buy, it doesn't fit all your requirements, but mostly it would fit like all your requirements within time, money, and even the people that are involved. You don't typically need to buy or not. You don't typically need to hire that many people for that.
Gotcha, interesting. And
Mhm.
since your IT department's more on the unprepared and inexperienced side, I can assume you guys want no custom built system, kind of a software that you guys kind of want to implement and buy that
I
kind of
guess it
stuff.
depends on what it can do because, like we said, we would like have everything that we want, and if we were to get a solution that doesn't even cover what we want, then what's the point of investing in it in the first place?
Gotcha. So looking at your two options, I know you guys are looking at Hero CRM and
Mhm.
CRM Action. I know Hero is more expensive but has a fuller kind of 360-degree kind of view of the customer on their
Mhm.
background and kind of more details. And CRM Action is cheaper with just enough just to track the
Mhm.
basics of a customer,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And you need help choosing between the two and then implementing them into the business.
Yep.
Cool. I think I think I got the gist of the situation.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on to the follow-up question. So, which groups of stakeholders should we meet up before recommending a CRM system?
Interesting. Can I have a second to gather my thoughts?
Yeah.
I know from looking at the situation, I think
Hmm.
your two main groups to look at will be the people actually using the CRM and the customers as well. Once we look at the people who are looking at who are actually using the CRM, we really want to know how they want it to be implemented, what they want to see in the CRM, and kind of what helps them on their day to day while they're contacting customers, what kind of details they need.
Who are
And,
these users?
um, the customers of Big Bucks. Do we have any information on who exactly those customers are?
That's who we're asking.
Um,
Based off of the case, do you know who we would be going to in the first place? Like, Big Bucks is a big company, but where, who in Big Bucks should we go to?
Particularly people on our help desk services
Okay. Yep.
and probably the IT department as well.
Hmm.
Although they're not going to be very much in kind of building the CRM, they're going to
Hmm.
be ones kind of helping implement this into our system.
Yep.
I would definitely have them a part of this as well.
Okay. Yep. So is that your final answer?
Yes.
Okay, so I would say a little bit of feedback on that was first off, you dived right in and you said the people that would be using it, which was a good one, but you need to be a little bit more specific. When you said big bucks, I'm like, well, that's like the question I'm asking is when you start doing this, you need to talk to stakeholders about what's your issue. Like, let's walk you through how you would even use a system like this in the first place. But who would be using it? Would it be HR? Would it be finance? Would it be IT? And you hit the nail on the head over there where you said it was more about the IT help desk. That's what I was looking for, and the IT team as well. What I did kind of like was like, what when you said customers? So I'm kind of curious here. Do you know what a customer relationship management system is?
Is it where kind of what where the HR team kind of takes tickets and kind of gets information on the customer and through their kind of contact with the customer, or am I totally off the mark?
Yeah, you're half off the mark. So you are right that this is something where you use to kind of see like, okay, this person has contacted us before about this, and that. They had issues with this. Maybe the last time we were on a call, like this person worked with them. That's what the system is, but it's not a customer facing system. It's typically internal. So think about like if you were to go call your bank and you wanted to maybe get issued another card or something like that, you don't have access to that. It's mostly just them internally, and they'll know like, oh yeah, so your phone number, that's your phone number, and we can link it to your account, that kind of thing. That's all on their own system. That's what a CRM system would be. But if you're being involved, that's more of like actually like some, I don't know, like a chatbot. Like I've never seen that before. I think like there are probably ones out there, but for this specifically, it's just to see everything on track. So like in the case itself, they said that they have nothing to track or prioritize customer issues. So some things like you may want to escalate if one is more important than the other. Maybe someone just wants to change their password and someone just actually like their account just got hacked. Like, of course, the account got hacked is more important. So that one is like a more of an internal system that they need to do. So it is not client facing. I mean, it is client facing, yeah, but it's not customer facing where the person actually sees everything. Some systems could be like that where you can see the tickets, but usually that's internal and not actually customer facing. So I would say that for the answer specifically, you gave a good answer minus that little hiccup there with the customer. But I think like if you learned a little bit more about like let's say what an ERP system is or CRM or all the types of systems out there and what role they play in businesses and with clients, it could be a lot easier. So that is something that like if you're trying to prepare for a technology consulting case interview, you would want to know that. Like I know like typically you would probably get a technical interview if you're going for a technical role, but for technology consulting, they want to see how much do you know about the actual like I don't know how you say it, the world of IT. So maybe like, oh, what's big data? Like you may not know how to work with big data, but at least know what big data is. And in general, there's also like a lot more layers than just groups of stakeholders too. So for example, a great answer would include identifying business partners and try to understand key performance metrics that the systems will have to meet. So for that, that would be more about like, okay, well, yeah, we have a system, like we want to see everything that they're doing, which is a good thing, a good and a bad thing actually about when you ask a user, what do you want? But at the same time, maybe it doesn't align with what the leadership wants. Maybe leadership cares about your turnaround time, and but then the user's just like, well, I would want this button to be here, or I want this report to show up. That's very small. But if all those little things that you talk to the user about doesn't actually apply to the main point of like having the CRM system, then it's basically useless. So you always want to see who's the main key decision makers in here. So stakeholders could be like the IT team, and then also people who's usually like gathering the data and reporting off that. So in this case, the leadership of the project, and also what do they care about? So usually there's like key performance indicators like okay turnaround time, maybe click through rate, or I don't know, like all these random things, but these are usually the ones that they care about. But the thing about whenever it's about stakeholders is like who cares about them, what are they doing with this information, and that can actually help you really learn about what the requirements are.
Gotcha. I did have a question.
Yeah.
So for do we have more information on like Hero CRM and Action CRM? What they kind of provide the IT team and in terms of what they see about the customer?
Yeah, so for this case, Actually, whatever was just provided is like all we're going to provide. All of this is really just walking through your thought process of the buy and build. So you don't really need to know anything about the software other than the fact of what's provided. Like one's more robust, but it does cost more money, and the other one is like a little bit more lean, but is not as expensive. So those two, like just thinking about that in the frame. So any of these questions I'm going to ask is really more focused on the process than it is on the solution.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question is, you have collected 70 business requirements for the new CRM system. Hero CRM meets 50 of the requirements, while CRM Action would satisfy 35 of them. Both systems fit within Big Bucks budget. Which system should we recommend? So we can either do Hero CRM, CRM Action, or further analysis if necessary. So what is your answer and why?
Can just to make sure I have everything.
Mhm.
So we have 70 business requirements. Hero meets 50,
Yep.
and the action means 35.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And both fit within the budget.
Both of them, but we- um, do we know how long each takes to kind of implement into our system?
Let's just assume that time isn't really a matter here because they both fit into the time frame.
Both in the time and budget.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Can I take a minute to gather my thoughts?
Yeah.
So after looking at what we have so far,
Mhm.
70 business requirements, Hero meets 50, Action meets 35. I think we would need to have further analysis
Okay.
because we don't know exactly what these requirements are and what they fulfill exactly. So maybe I would say meeting with the IT team or leadership, kind of going through these requirements and prioritizing them in terms of what do we want to see right now and what can we put on the back burner. And then after that, I would definitely restructure those business requirements and kind of have like a number-based system where number one is what's most pressing, all the way down to number 70. And then after that, kind of put them side by side and seeing what hero or action, what kind of really fits in with our kind of priorities.
Mhm.
And after that, I think that'll be put us in a better perspective, a better place to make a decision on which one would be best,
Mhm.
regardless of price or time.
Okay. That was a great answer. I would say you definitely answered it to the level I was expecting it. So, number one is yes, you got the right answer. It's further analysis if necessary. And what I liked was that you actually detailed what are the next steps rather than saying, yeah, like this is why we'd want to find out. But then you didn't really just say that, but you actually added on to it, which is the process of how to actually do it. That was really good. I think like if you were to do this in a real case interview, you would get really good points there. And you even went very specific to as to like what you would be doing, how you would rank it, which also is really good too, because that's what we do in reality. We're like actually not just like, yeah, we like these, but these are must have, these are would likes. You ranked it, which is what really good, because when you get documentation like that, it does help guide conversations a lot better. So that was a really good answer. All right, so we do have another question. So what information or insights would benefit the business to help improve the call center? Name types of information or activities, such as key performance indicators, that this call center should be able to capture.
To repeat that question, I'm sorry.
Yep. So, what information or insight would benefit the business to help improve the call center? Name types of information or activities, such as key performance indicators, that the call center should be able to capture.
Just to make sure I have everything of the question,
Mhm.
we're looking for information and other just activities that would benefit the call center to
Mhm.
kind of implement in our CRM. And we're specifically looking at key performance indicators.
Yep.
Cool. May I take a few seconds to gather my thoughts?
Go for it.
So looking at the information that I have,
Mhm.
I think some of the key information that we want to see is definitely our notes on the client.
Yep.
I know I would definitely want to see how it kind of lies on priority at first to see so that help desk really knows what they're getting into and how kind of pressing the issue is. And also, I think it will be very helpful to see how long it would take to actually answer the question or the need to
Hmm.
kind of see and gauge kind of what requirements are will be needed ahead.
Hmm.
Also, specifically when you are notes on what is kind of is going on. And I think it will be better if we have it in a way that it's easy to write down and see. Definitely have it all kind of in one screen, so there's no scrolling needed.
Hmm.
I think only bullet if we can make it that it's only bullet points and no big paragraphs, so it's kind of easier for the IT department or the help desk to kind of see these quick points and make these decisions quicker. If it's visually friendly, then it's more time efficient, and time is money, so that's definitely going to benefit the not only the client but also the business itself.
Hmm.
And I think those are the two big kind of priorities and kind of stuff we would like to see on this CRM.
Okay, so a few things. Like I think the first two you said are good because those are actual KPIs, but then the second part that was really more about like priorities and decision making for design. So that's not actually what we were looking for. We were more looking like, oh, number of calls, duration of caller demographics, maybe like how many do you do over time, closing rate, that kind of thing. Those are KPIs that we were looking for. And one thing that I was also looking for is like, why do we need this? Like, what I think the part where you talked about the design elements and why those are important, that works. But what we're asking about here is KPI specifically. So, for example, a number of calls, like we want to know maybe like, is there a reason why there's like a lot of calls for this today? Like, is there a bug going on in our system? Or maybe that there's like the holidays and everyone's calling now. Like, that is the kind of reporting that the client would want to know. They would want to see exactly like what drives what, because if you're capturing data, you want to make sure there's a reason why you're capturing it and that you're phrasing it the right way in the software. So that's what this question was really asking for. Did you have any particular questions about how to even answer the question like this?
Yeah, I think when I heard the question, I don't know why my first part, what I wrote down first is actually the design part. I think that's where
Hmm.
my head was kind
Okay.
of geared towards. I guess that's how I kind of saw the question framed.
Hmm.
Were there any like key kind of words in the question that kind of would make me that would guide my thinking in terms of color demographic, kind of
Yeah.
priority and that stuff?
Yeah, so it would be, I know like name types of information or activities kind of seems a little bit weird to phrase, but key performance indicators, they're kind of universal all throughout in terms of like what are the metrics. They're always going to be something with numbers or something about to use it for reporting. So if anything, anytime you hear anything about key performance indicators, think about reporting. How like what kind of reports would somewhere like a call center have? What kind of information would they want to make a decision in something, like maybe someone needs to be fired, then like how what kind of information you need to do that. So if you think about it more about like on the managerial basis, I know like you're looking for more of a technical role, but it actually really helps to learn about what businesses care about before you can even do something, because if you were to build something that they didn't care about or it was not even hitting what they wanted to do, then it's a useless functionality. So that's why a lot of times we like to design it based off of what you need, your requirements, the key performance indicators, and you want to kind of work around the software based off of those. Otherwise, it's just a lot of bloated software that they don't care about. So the key words really was key performance indicators. If you were to just ignore everything else, honestly, that would have been fine too. That like keyword, basic keywords, key phrase is what's really driving the whole thing of like, okay, what are the metrics that you would want to hit and why? And then when you think about, actually what I like to do is I think about the why first and then derive the key performance indicators from that. Like for example, performance, what would you want to know? Maybe like closing rate, maybe like number of calls, and see like maybe this person is just on their call on the phone talking to their mom the whole time instead of talking to actual people and closing it and closing actual tickets. So that is something that you can think about next time is like, okay, if I was in this situation, I think a lot of people who do these, they're like, well, of course I've never worked with a call center. Like, how will I know? But if you think about it realistically, like, okay, if I was the customer and this is the person who's helping me, what would be important to them? Like, of course, like let's say Chase has this call support center. What would be important to them about me? yeah, they probably want to make sure the customer is satisfied. So probably, like at the end they have like, oh, do you want to stay along for a survey or whatever? That may also be something like a KPI of like, oh, if you rated 5 as opposed to rated 1 from that. Or maybe if it's like something about, are they new customers? Are they returning customers? Which would be a little bit more on the caller demographics, or the person themselves, if I were now in the perspective of hiring or HR, of like, okay, who's like actually closing, who's being successful compared to people who's lagging or people who need help, and or maybe just taking too long and they're not direct with their calls, then probably that would be more about duration of calls. And sometimes like maybe like even having short calls could just mean other issues than just closing it. So it's really just all these elements. So focus more about the why and then derive all of that together. And if you're really trying to figure out like all of these words are thrown at you, really focus on the ones that seem a little bit different, like key performance indicators. Now you know. So did you know what key performance indicators were before this?
I've heard the term, yeah, and
Okay.
yes, but I wasn't thinking about it into the numbers, metrics, and
Okay.
of
Yeah, so typically those are actual numbers or metrics. It doesn't always have to be numbers. Like for example, caller demographics, that's not a number, but something as simple as like new user, returning user, that is also technically a key performance indicator. You could say like how many of them are new, how many of them are returning, and then the percentage and the ratio. So really, I think this is why I really recommend looking at current events, learning about industries, learning about business. And even if you come from a technical role or you don't even want to look at that, it's really important to learn about this, to know why would the user care about this, why would the management care about this. Sometimes we're just like, oh, why would you care about this? This is stupid. But if you really look into why it matters to them, then you'll be like, oh, okay, I see why it's important now. But then there's also another layer of like, how important is it compared to everything else? So it's always like a moving piece over here.
gotcha. And that's a follow-up
Yeah.
question. Would it be
Yep.
fair to ask? I mean, I guess it would be fair to ask what a key performance indicator would be,
Hmm.
but would I be able to ask follow-up questions like a business situation kind of case framework where I drill down on what if like color demographics or like to keep asking questions so I learn more about what the business actually wants, or would I get more of just what you kind of mentioned like numbers, matrix reporting, kind of like that fast
Hmm.
kind of response, and I have to kind of take it from there. I don't know what.
Yeah, so I would depend on what kind of questions you're asking. If you're asking it and you know that you need this information to answer your questions, then yes, ask it. But if it's just like, I would like to know it, but it's not required, then you're just wasting time. You're not being efficient. So they're really trying to see like, go as lean as possible, only ask the questions where it made sense to ask it. And when you do ask it, you want to kind of phrase in a way like, oh, so I really want to know about this because it will help me answer this question, and then what's the question, like blah blah blah. So that would help them understand the logic behind why you're asking the question. So it's not just like, oh, what's the caller demographic, then all of a sudden like, well, why are you asking? I don't know, like it's just out of the question. So usually if you phrase it the right way in terms of why it's important for you to know to answer a specific question or consider something, then that would be really good to do if you were to ask a question.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Cool.
All right, any other questions?
In general, or about the specific question.
This particular question, we have one more.
Uh, no, I think I'm ready to move on.
Okay. All right. So, how would you go about gathering and prioritizing the requirements of Hero CRM and CRM Action?
Gathering and prioritizing the requirements of hero and action.
Hmm.
I'm gonna take a minute and then I'll come back to you with a
Okay.
question. So the steps I think I would take to gather and prioritize that of hero and action CRM is that I would first want to meet with the help desk, the IT team, to really know what they need to be as efficient as possible. Then I would possibly do a deep dive on hero and action, kind of talk to their development, just the representatives, see what they offer, or go on their website, kind of see what they offer, and see what boxes are checked and stuff. And on each kind of power, on each kind of requirements that they kind of have on their CRM,
Hmm.
I would lay out a priority list for each one. So for Hero and Action, kind of compare what they have and what was really needed for the IT team and the help desk,
Mhm.
and kind of rank them both side by side. Really taking into consideration what what's definitely needed and what's more about their want. Then I would definitely go back to the IT team, kind of see if what I have is kind of correct, if the priorities I have set forward are kind of match what they kind of believe is the best, maybe get their opinions on it, and then go to the leadership team or those who have the final say with all this information, pitch it to them, pitch all the findings, and so they can have a better understanding of what my findings were and what position they are in to kind of make a final decision.
Mhm. Is that your final answer?
Uh, yes.
Okay. So I would say that's a good start. It's not the full answer I was expecting. And one thing that I do want to kind of caution you about is anytime where you go something and stuff, you want to avoid the saying something like and stuff. It's not really that professional. A lot of people end up using placeholders and fillers words like, um, uh, even things like thing or that or all those things where it's basically just a placeholder. You always want to say like maybe all those things, would be all those matters. It's a little bit fancy looking. It's really the same thing as a placeholder too, but it just seems a little bit more professional than something like and stuff or like all the time. A lot of people end up doing that without realizing, and then they just don't seem that professional. So
Gotcha.
moving on to your actual answer, it was a good start, but it wasn't the full answer like I mentioned. So when you mentioned asking the like help desk people, what were they looking for? I would kind of go into a little bit more about like what specifically are you doing? Are you doing interviews, focus groups? Are you going to be like literally watching them do their work and see like how they do things? Ask them like what, and even maybe questions like what are you going to ask them? Are you going to ask them like what are their pain points with what they're doing right now? What would you like in the system? That it would be really good to start off first before going right into like, okay, well, now we're going to weigh out everything. But first off, like, yeah, ask them. But what is really important about consulting specifically is that you want to know what matters. And that's usually how you build the requirements too. It's not just the overall like requirements of having the software or having the reporting aspects. Sometimes it's really the small features that make up the big picture as well. So another thing as well was that if you were to do this, I think like you would also need to provide the, I mean, if you had that part about being very specific about the types of ways you can ask or gather these requirements, typically the benefit and the cost, the why factor, the impact factor of each of them would be really good. Like, for example, if you were to do an interview, you can really hone in on the user experience. And then maybe we were to go through the technical side, like maybe the runtime is too high, then yeah, you'll know that like, okay, performance is really important, then we may want to cut that down. So it does have like a different way of thinking for each different way you're going for. And one thing that we were looking for was like, actually, what's the impact of those kind of questions or those kind of ways you're doing it? So another one is separating technical versus non-technical. Like user experience is nice, it's also important, but the technical side is also just as important. This is a build versus buy, so that is very important because if it's like a buy, that's pretty simple, like probably is out of the box. But then maybe like we need to think about like, what if you don't have this feature? Can we even build in the first place? Can we do like customization on top of that? And if we do have customization, that's all of it is customization. Everything has to be programmed. What are the technical, like probably there's no technical issues from that. But between the two, if one is a little bit like, here's everything, you can't do anything outside of it, you have to work with it, versus the one where, yeah, like probably if you have the right time and the right resources, then yes, you could probably code it. But again, like this is where the technical requirements come in as well. Like if, for example, you need integration with, well, this is CRM system. So maybe you need integration with like a phone. I don't know. I don't even know how that works, but maybe integration with a VoIP system. Then that way it will record like the time period that it's actually on rather than like actually hand coding like, oh, it's been 5 minutes. Then that would be something that is like, maybe it's a requirement. If it's a requirement, can even support something like that on the technical side. So having that really is important to kind of see like what is feasible or not. So maybe the user experience requires all these kind of things, but what if it's just not feasible with the software? So that's just as important. Um, Another one is actually like how to track it and trace the requirements over time. So everything changes once you do testing and once you realize like, okay, well, maybe this feature is not that important and we rather want this feature that is just as important. And if we like we have to sacrifice one over the other, I'd rather choose that one. Really having that documentation throughout time is also important. And also for consultants, it's just as important too, because if they say, yeah, we wanted this, but then in the past they said they didn't want this, that could be something we use. I mean, I wouldn't say use against them, but it could help us because as time goes on, you've reused a lot of resources, time, and then now you can say like, well, you mentioned this before, that it's really hard for us to work around that because we built the system based off of what you said back then. But again, it's not like something unheard of. Like we've always changed our requirements anyways. We always say like, yeah, we want to stick to what we designed today. It's never gonna happen like that. So that's like what I would say what makes it a great answer. But I think what you said was a good start, minus the part where you said and stuff. Like I would just try to train that out of yourself when you do interviews. But overall, since we're nearing at the end of this interview, I would say that you definitely handled this very professionally. You said like, oh, can I have a few seconds, get a few minutes? And you ask questions in a smart way. So I would say you did a really good job. I think like maybe reading up a little bit more on the technical, not technical, but the worlds of technology, like what's a CRM, what's an ERP, and that can really help you with learning about it because during the case itself, like it's not technical by any means, but it does ask about a few things that they'll expect you to have some kind of baseline knowledge. So for example, what's CRM? What does it mean really in the business world? And sometimes current events could really help with that to know like, okay, yeah, I know what a CRM is, but how is it like in practice? And most people don't have the resources to really work in a company where you can see everything and learn what it is. So current events is really important too. Knowing what's out there too. So for example, what are the CRM systems out there can help you understand the differences between them and what kind of decision making come from it. So in this case, it could be Salesforce. I mean, right now we're using Hero CRM and CRM Action, but knowing about that too can help you with decision making without actually being in there. And also, like, I know a lot of this, like, especially the last question, a lot of that you wouldn't have thought about that. I think even when I started out, I wouldn't have thought about, like, oh, like, let's track it over time. I thought, like, we stick to it from the very beginning, but it's never going to be possible. So, that part, it's just like it would be great to have if you have it. But I think, like, where you start out was also a good answer as well.
Thank you. I kind
Mhm.
of have just kind of two general questions,
Yeah. Mhm.
just on the process itself. Like when I was kind of gathering my thoughts, and I don't know how much time is too much time. So
Mhm.
sometimes, like, if I would have had some time, maybe I would have gotten more creative with it. Maybe would have thought
Mhm.
a little bit more about these situations. But how do you know when I'm taking way too long to kind of get my kind of thoughts in order, or is that even such a thing as taking too long, or something too little?
Yeah, so I would say that's actually a pretty subjective answer if I were to give you one, because the best way to do it is if you literally walk them through what you're writing and what you're thinking. That way they know, like, okay, are you wasting time or are you literally thinking and just staring at the paper? Because I don't know either way. I mean, it looked like you were taking notes and drawing things, but I don't know what you're doing. But if you communicated your entire thought process, like, okay, well, I'm going to look into this, and then maybe if it doesn't work out that way, we're going to do this, that would at least tell me like, okay, that technically counts as an answer, even though you're thinking. But it does help me really understand what you're trying to say. So if you were to give an answer and then it doesn't really correlate with what you were thinking, I can kind of understand from what you were thinking at least to say like, okay, maybe you misunderstood something, but because I know what you were thinking, like I would let that slide. So that usually is like based off of how good your thinking is. Basically, if it was 10 minutes and you really were going down and thinking about every single element, I would actually say, yeah, you can do that. But if you were just like 10 minutes staring at the piece of paper, and I would just like, what are you doing? Or like, are you actually thinking? Are you literally stuck? And that's where it may feel too long. But if you were to talk through the process, it doesn't feel too long because you're already providing your answer, even if you don't have the answer ready. So in most case interviews, I would recommend that. I think, like, for example, if you were to just say, like, okay, I'm going to conduct interviews with the help desk. And then if you say something like that, also talk about like why the help desk, why interviews, what kind of questions, then I can kind of guide you as well, like without you even providing the answer just yet. And that way, like you will even be on a better track than if you just constantly worked on yourself and then told me the answer. So a lot of times I think a lot of people actually do the like the first part where they just do everything and then they tell me the answer and then they go down like a really bad path. But if they told me about the process from the very beginning, I can actually kind of correct them or say like, oh no, 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 that's not what I meant, without you going down the rabbit hole and like, yeah, this is like not gonna work. But whenever it comes to something like that, really it's subjective. Like I can't say maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 seconds, like maybe they're expecting you to say it from the very get-go and just know it. But the best way to do it is if you really were to walk them through what you're thinking, and then you can conclude it at the end after all that thinking. So it does tell me your thought process. It does make the interviewer at least feel a little bit more involved, even though you technically you didn't give your final answer just yet.
Gotcha. Right.
Okay.
And
And
then
what's
just
your second question?
yeah, my last question was just how to combat like nerves before an interview. I know that's something I very much struggle with,
Mm-hmm.
especially for case interviews where I kind of don't have like something in the back of my head that's like behavioral, kind of
Yeah.
know yourself, kind of that kind of thing. Like, how do you combat nerves before an interview?
Were you nervous for this?
Not very much because I knew it was kind of one on one. It's like
Yeah.
I'm not actually applying for a job, but once when I actually do interviews, that's when I really get
Okay.
kind of anxious and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say it didn't seem like you were nervous at all. It seemed like you were pretty on top of it and confident. But yeah, I can definitely see like a mock interview won't have the same feeling as the real interview. So when it comes to case interview, I can definitely tell nervousness is like a lot higher than like if you were to do a behavioral interview. Behavioral interview is very conversational. You can't really mess up talking about yourself unless you accidentally say something wrong. If it's a case interview, there is kind of a right or wrong way, and there's also like the probably the hardest one to prepare for and to know like how you're doing. So what I would do instead is practice. Like I honestly, when I did it, I only did one. So that's like the only way I was like, okay, well, I think I'm prepared. I have the interview tomorrow. I have like no chance. I have to do this. And that was like kind of what I was thinking. But then I was thrown with this case that definitely was not even anything I was close to for being prepared. Even if I did prepare 10 months for this interview, it wasn't even what I was expecting. It was a technology consulting case interview just like this. So that's where you really need to kind of kick in like, okay, now what do I do? I was like even more nervous at the time, but kind of thinking about putting yourself in the shoes of like an actual consultant and do this as if this is really a client that you're working with. That really helped me because if I was dealing it in this interview, then I'm like, okay, this is an interview. I'm going to be evaluated every second. But if I put myself in that shoes of a consultant working with the client, then it's just like a normal conversation. I'm just providing a solution. And then it also helped me recall a lot of things in my mind as well, because if I were to be in an interview, I'd probably block out all of it and be like, oh my God, I'm a deer in headlights. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. But if I put myself as a consultant, then I'm like, okay, everything I learned in school comes to make sense now. Like I could talk about this, I could talk about that, even though I did not prepare for the case interview, at least that particular type. Everything that I was thinking about came out. And I think the more nervous you are, the more kind of shut out you are with what you're thinking about, and maybe even like what to say. Like you might start stuttering and you might be a little bit like, oh, wait, I just said that. And then you'll kind of lose confidence on that. But if you just kind of slow down, I think that was a really big thing, is that a lot of people who do interviews, they kind of speak really fast or they're thinking really fast, and then whatever comes out of their mouth is like does not even make sense. That's a lot of people, but slowing down really, really helps. And I think a lot of people are like, how do I slow down? Like this is just something I'm just going to do. I can't just slow down. But practicing can really help with that. The more you do, the more you're like, okay, it's not that bad. It's you're starting to expect like everything that they're going for. And even the types of questions, like for example, key performance indicators, you'll like even know like what kind of key performance indicators are from practicing. And even if it was tech or not, like that is also a question you get in management consulting case interviews. So you'll be prepared. And the more you know about the unknown, the more prepared you'll feel. And because of that, you'll be less nervous and you'll actually be able to slow down and take it in. So I know that was like a lot to throw in. It really is evaluating how you are when you're nervous. Why are you nervous? And then what can you do to work against it? But typically, I would say practice, practice, practice. And specifically for technology consulting case interviews, there's not a lot of cases out there, or at least not that are public. And usually just practicing even management consulting case interviews or even practicing networking. I think that for me, that was actually the big key. Like I only practiced one case interview when I did this. And a lot of my networking, I was like, okay, meeting someone new that I've never met before. How do I even deal with that encounter? Like, do I know what they're going to say? Like, I don't want them to judge me or anything like that. What do I say if they say something I don't know? Then how would I react to that? That honestly, I just transferred that knowledge and experience to this. And then all of a sudden, it just felt like normal. Like I'm talking to a random person who's just asking me a question about what I could do to help their problem. Then if you put it in that kind of mindset, it's so much easier to understand.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for taking the time to interview me and kind of help me and walk me through this process. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And if you have any other questions, just let me know. Technology Consulting Committee also is a resources out there. All the cases that we're going over today are going to be in there and also sent in the link down below. So if you also want to apply for the program, definitely check it out. It's free. And hopefully, Diego, you got a lot of value out of this and hopefully you get that job offer.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.